right, welcome. Really glad to have you all here to talk about cover crops this evening. We're really excited to share some wonderful knowledge with you. To introduce myself, my name is Claire Reisman. I'm the assistant manager at the Chadwick Garden at UCSC. Yeah, a little overview of what we're doing in the session tonight is Orin, our garden manager, is going to speak for a bit on the topic of cover crops and ranging all the way out from there. And then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. For the Q&A, if you have questions during the presentation, please just put them in the chat. That's the best way for us to track those. And if it's a clarifying question, as an assistant, it's my greatest joy to interrupt my boss. So you're giving me that joy. So for clarifying questions, I'll interrupt Orin, and then for questions, I'll just gather the rest to get us going at the end. But please use the chat function for that. If you're having any technical issues, Vanessa Ackerman is our incredible tech guru behind the scenes. Also, if you hear Orin or me speak to Vanessa, she is a real person, not an AI robot. She's wonderful in supporting us through this. So yeah, that's the way this is going to go. A few notes. We are recording this session and it will be shared afterwards. So you may notice Orin will speak at quite a clip, and so don't worry about catching every word. You can come back and watch this later. He'll also talk about resources. We'll try to capture that in the chat. And also don't worry about trying to keep up with all that. Everything that can be shared afterwards, links, resources, etc. We'll also follow up with a document there, so you can just sort of sit back and enjoy and take in the information. So before I pass it over to Orin, I wanted to share a land acknowledgement that UCSC and the farm and garden, although we're gathering in remote spaces, the land on which the UCSC campus rests is the unceded territory of the Owaswa-speaking Uyupi tribe. The Amamutsun tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. Acknowledging ancestors on this land. And I think without any further note, I'll pass it over to Orin.
Thank you, Claire. And let us hope that we can be as good in terms of stewarding the land and its resources as the Amamutsun were. I'm going to start things off here. I'm going to read a paragraph from an article I wrote on cover crops and then offer a quote. And then I have remotely a guest speaker for a 1 minute, I don't know what to call it, but you'll see. So here goes. Cover crops, often used as green manures, and their positive restorative effects on the soil come down to us through agricultural antiquity. Additionally, their ability to stimulate the growth of follow or successive crops is well documented via Chinese manuscripts from 3,000 years ago. Greek and Roman cultures also featured liberal references to cover crops in both technical treatises as well as poetry. The Roman poet Virgil's classic Georgics, Earthworks, is an epic poem, and by epic I don't mean like surfers mean it, an epic poem of agriculture laced with frequent and quite specific references to the use of cover crops, green manures, and compost. In fact, cover crops, compost, and cultivation, that is digging or plowing the soil, are the three fundamental drivers of any sustainable organic growing system, from a postage stamp sized backyard to sections of wheat in Kansas. And a section of wheat is 640 acres or 1 square mile. So now a quote and a nod to antiquity, and then we'll get with the modernity thing. This is by a first century Roman writer and farmer, no doubt a philosopher and a statesperson too, Columella. In this quote, he refers to lupins and manure. Lupins are a legume that were used at that time and still used in Europe in much the same way we use fava beans and bell beans in a cover crop system. And manure in the days of old, like even up until like 1950, meant compost. They're synonyms, compost and manure. The quote is, Where no kind of manure is to be had, I think the cultivation of lupins will be found the readiest and best substitute. If they are sown around the middle of September in poor soil and then plowed in the following spring, they will answer as well as the best manure. And that makes sense in terms of timing because central Italy down Sicily is about the same latitude we are. So what they did then, there, we do now here. And now, so a little bit about antiquity. It's cool. But maybe now a shout out to modernity. This is a short 1-minute spoken piece by a remarkable young man named David Robles. He's an apprentice program grad now working with Food What, teaching life skills and farming to youth. And he, along with others such as, well, my assistant here, Claire, represent the next generation and of the next generation of soil stewards. And folks, we're in good hands. And folks, I put David on the spot, my bad, giving him only 36 hours to come up with something. So listen up, and then we'll start the slideshow and the talk. He calls it 16 and 60. That is, there are 16 lines in 60 seconds. I only allotted him a minute, my bad. So maybe we could play that, and then I'll break into the slideshow and talk.
I will continue it. I'll start it over.
Earth does it. An ecosystem agreement, an evolution of sorts. We seek to understand these processes more. Seasons do change, so the earth does age. How we let her rest determines how she'll change. The drops from the rains can be far too loud, but the leaves from a lupin can soften the sound. Even in the storm that is the world right now, she can use the grasses to hold her ground. As it is above, it shall be below. We seek to understand what seeds to sow. Cycles must complete before we find our truths, so attention should be fixed on how our roots grow. The fact of the matter is what matters now is known. Black, brown, and beautiful, this soil can be grown. May we liberate the land. May we learn to love our home. May she be understood and her tyrants overthrown.
Thanks, David. Okay, maybe we can start with the slideshow.
Yep.
Okay, this first, perhaps this first slide should be entitled, "Oh, what a soil," with 3 exclamation points. It is dark, high in organic matter. It is deep and uniform. It has good aggregation and structure. Its marbled and pebbled look attests to that. And yes, as indicated by the insert on the right, it is open and permeable, allowing roots to ramble and forage for water and nutrients. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, if your soil looks like this, in a representative sense, percentage-wise, you are good, ideal even. This is a beautiful slide. This is a beautiful soil percentage-wise. Now you may say, no, it's flat, 2-dimensional, even boring. But I say, no, 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 not at all. This diagram leaps off the page and shouts fertility and fecundity. It's probably the result of years of good practices, of utilizing what I call the 3 C's in a judicious and consistent manner. The 3 C's, that trifecta of cultivation or tillage, compost, beyond today's talk, but maybe later we can have a talk on just compost, and covered crops, today's topic. So this diagram depicts the 4 components of soil. And again, this is an ideal ratio of the percentage of it, percentages of each of those. So what have we got? Well, one thing is when you grab a handful of soil, only 50% or half of it is solid material. That's represented here in this pie diagram by the mineral particles and the organic matter on the right. On the left side is pore space, or the gaps between the solids of the soil. I love the scientists, they call the pore space the interstitial spaces or interstitial voids. How cool is that? And the pore space in the soil is where, as you see, air and water reside. And ideally, for good growing, this is a very pregnant moment here. This is when plants actually grow. You want that pore space to be occupied approximately equally by air and water. Okay, let's look at the four components and what they give us. The mineral particles. When I draw this diagram on a blackboard, I put mineral, and then I put in parentheses rock flour, F-L-O-U-R. That is, this represents massive rocks and boulders that are ground down by natural forces over millennia, even geological time, into what we now call soil. And it is the biggest proportion of the solid material in the soil. And here's something sad but true. The soil you inherit and its fertility or richness is largely a function of, well, what kind of rocks did that soil get ground down out of? Some rocks are more fertile, that is, they have more mineral nutrients in them, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, things like that. And some not so much. Rich rocks, basalt, micas, limestone, not so rich, sandstone, mudstone, quartz. But you inherit a soil, and that largely determines both its texture, is it a clay, a sand, a silt, and then how inherently rich it is. But don't fear, because you see that small slice, 5% organic matter. And let me just say, if you have 5% organic matter in your soil, you are fat. That's fat with a pH. The soils at the farm, for instance, have 3%. I believe we have Rich Everett on the line here. Rich and Laura run Everett Family Farm, an outstanding organic farm on the Central Coast here. They have like 2% organic matter. So this is a small but mighty fraction of the soil. Its influence on the soil is far greater than the small percentage represented. So what's organic matter? It's like basically anything that was once alive. Plant residues, both roots and shoots, soil microbes, they function, they live, some for a very short period of time, and then when they die, they literally give up their corpses that rots down as organic matter. That's kind of the solid portion of your soil. You work, whatever soil you have, you work on increasing your organic matter content. The two tools to do that are compost and cover crops. And it is actually phenomenal what you can do in taking even a wretched soil, a wicked sticky adobe clay or a sievey sand, the water just drains right through. And in a few short years, using compost and cover crops, really increase the soil's organic matter and thus its fertility. On the left here, in the gaps, the pore spaces, you have air and water. Air is vital, particularly the oxygen in air. It fuels root growth and the aerobic respiration needs of microbes. And water, well, what can I say about water? How about water is the pulse of the planet, folks. But let me just say this, that the way that nutrients get into plants for use is you have the mineral component and the organic component, and slowly over time, by enzymes, by microbes, they are broken down and dissolved into the soil water. And then basically nutrients hitchhike a ride up into the plants in water. So maybe we go on to the next slide here.
Hey, Orin, can I jump in? We've got a question. Can you define tillage?
I can. Tillage is just working the soil. How do you like my populism there? Working instead of working. Working the soil. You do it on a hand. There's any number of styles you can work the soil. Cultivation and tillage are synonyms. Working the soil on a garden scale, usually using a spade and a fork. On a field scale, a tractor with various implements you can pull behind it. Some of the implements you can use for tillage are things called a chisel plow, a disc plow, a harrow. And then later on in the slideshow, you'll see what we're using in a lot of small farms on the Central Coast and around California now. It's a mechanical spader. And it's basically like digging, but on a field scale. I'll wait and explain it a little more when we get to the picture. So let's talk about soil structure. Again, there are a lot of terms that are used interchangeably. Soil structure, good tilth, aggregation, these are all used somewhat interchangeably. But if you have a soil that has good structure, whether it's a sand, silt, or clay, it will have good aggregation. In soil, you have individual particles of sand, silt, and clay. You have more clay, you got a clay soil. You got more sand, you got a sandy soil. And they are individual particles. But what you want to work towards, and again, organic matter and good cultivation practices really aid with this, is getting those individual particles to bind or cement together into what are called aggregates. Okay, the slide on the right is a representation of either a whole bunch of aggregates and all the things that are contained in the soil. You've got organic matter, you've got the particles of sand, silt, and clay, you've got the gaps, the pores between the solids, you've got fungal micellular strands and more. But you could also say this little diagram on the right is an aggregate, an individual aggregate. And that's the way it goes. You take these individual particles of sand, silt, and clay, and you put them together with good practices into aggregates. Aggregates and stable aggregates are the foundation of fertility. Cover crops and compost are your friends in that regard. We can try to move on now. Next slide. Oh yeah, so if you have good structure and you have good aggregation, what's it look like? Well, it looks like a handful of soil looks when it's well done. But I like this analogy here. It looks like a cross section of, in this case, a couple loaves of bread. On the left, light and fluffy from Companion Bakery. On the right, walnut loaf, my favorite from Companion. And so what do we see? What does this show you? It shows you all the different kind of pebbled and marbled aspects of good structure, some gaps like that. Take a handful of soil. It's a monostructure. You don't want that. You want what's called a crumb or granular structure. This is kind of a good example of that. Later on, I'll show you a slide that it has some platy structure, which is not good. You're starting to compact the soil. So you could say you want a crummy soil. That's C-R-U-M-B-Y, not C-R-U-M-M-Y. We better move on. Next slide. Organic matter, we can move on. Oh, I love it. This is an overview of the main field at the farm, the UCSC farm, or as I'm calling it more and more as time goes on, our community farm. And this is probably, this is from 6, 7, 8 years ago. The plot on the right, you can see the grids differentiated. That was when we were doing some research on cover crops for strawberries to a whole program to lessen incidence of disease, particularly Fusarium and Verticillium wilt, two terrible problems in the strawberry world. So you see the plots. This is this slide was probably, I'm guessing, taken in December, maybe January, and it was probably one of those years you can see the hills are green, but maybe it rained early in September or October, everything sprouted out, got good and green, and then as so often happens these days, you have a 6 or 8 week hiatus where it don't rain. And it's almost like the crop is wilting on the vine, as it were. It's starting to look a little peaked there. Then sometimes we get these, so it can be like that for an interim period. And we get these miracle Marches where it rains a whole lot, sometimes too much. And then these awesome Aprils where it continues and it's more in the form of showers and it's good. And then maybe it doesn't even stop in May some years like that. But this is probably December, January. So we sowed the cover crop on the right in September, October. Now is an excellent window. It's still open for fall cover cropping, folks. Anytime from mid-late September through the end of November is a safe window. In truth, I have cover cropped into December, January, and February. And I have a specific formula of timing of cover crops I'll talk about later. Like that. So we've got an established plot of a mixed cover crop. Our go-to mix, it's not the only thing we use, is a mix that we in the trade call BVOP, bell beans, vetch, oats, and peas. And you can use cover crops singularly, just veg, just oats, just peas, just bell beans. Now, bell beans are simply a smaller seeded, cheaper fava bean. Fava beans are an excellent spring vegetable. And the seed has gotten really pricey, so it's cheaper for cover cropping purposes to buy bell beans. But let me also say here that if you're growing fava beans as a vegetable, you are not growing them as a cover crop. If they're grown as a cover crop, they're turned into the soil at an immature stage and rot down and add their organic matter, plus they fix nitrogen. If you grow them through to fruition, they're not just not a giver, they are a heavy taker. They're really nutrient demanding crops. So you have a separate plot for your fava beans, whether it's for the home kitchen or as a crop for sale. Fava beans are maybe my favorite spring veg. Okay, so on the right, we have that established crop, and you're into the rainy season, and you want to have establishment of your cover crop. That is a good leaf cover and a good holding, binding action of the roots before there's any appreciable rain. I'll also note that along Central Coast here, a lot of farmers look at the weather. Well, farmers do that all the time. They look for an oncoming set of wet systems, not deluges, but maybe like we're expected to get Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Maybe this heralds the opening of the rainy season here, folks. 1/10 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, like that. And they'll sow their cover crops, and again, you can do this in your home garden, just prior to the onset of these gentle systems coming in out of the Pacific, and let the rain irrigate the crop up. In some years, we don't ever have to irrigate our cover crops once they're up because we get periodic rain till spring. Some years when it's wicked dry, as it was 2011 through 15, we have to irrigate like that. So this is good on the right. We've established that the middle plot here is a just emerging young cover crop. Now, if it were to start raining cats and dogs, as it were, the soil would be heavily and negatively impacted until the foliage and the root action covers and protects it. On the right is, this must have been 10 years ago, because when Jim Leap was our manager, you see pictures of him later, and I'll say some more praiseworthy things about him. But he had this rotation in our main field. It's about 3 acres. We would take 1/7 of it each year and put it in a perennial ryegrass. Just let it sit, no quote unquote cash crops that year. Then he turned it in, then he moved it down the field, down the field, down the field, 1/7 each year, 7-year rotation. And the positive effects on the soil from that perennial ryegrass was phenomenal. And grasses are like that. They are really good at scavenging for nitrogen, keeping it from leaching down in the soil profile. And the way grass roots work, there are many fibrous mat-like roots. They hug and entwine with the soil. And grasses are almost every day. Some roots are dying, some new roots are growing. So they're adding organic matter to your soil as they grow. Thus the tilth, the aggregation, the look and feel of the soil when the crop is done is, as I said, phenomenal. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This is no doubt, the words on the right are true. I'm not going to speak much of them other than say that that which is listed under ecological processes is absolutely true. But when you stop and think about it, these are practices in one form or another that are part of the indigenous knowledge of all the people who have farmed and gardened over the 10,000 years of agriculture on the planet. And you might say, what? Soil analysis and nutrient budgeting 10,000 years ago? And I say, yep. There are both qualitative and quantitative ways you can assess your soil. But why I have this slide here is it's beautiful. And this is a summer shot. You can tell by the rolling golden hills in the background. This is a shot of a field of just an amazing summer grass called Sudan grass or black sorghum. It is a scary crop. And by that I mean scary good. it'll grow 6 to 8 feet tall in 6 to 8 weeks. Watch out. But it just establishes and grows and gives you biomass. Biomass is vegetation a lot and really rapidly, and then can be turned back into the soil as a green manure. Let me just say that if you're using this, whether it's on a field scale with tractors or a home scale, don't let it get too established. Take it down, chop it up, turn it to thigh high. It's much easier to deal with than when it gets 6 to 8 feet tall. This is a beautiful thing. Okay. That means. So yeah, we should define some terms here. Cover crop is any crop that's grown to protect and improve the soil. And the protectant part I'd like to dwell on a little bit here. And that is to say, as I've mentioned, the foliage of cover. Now, let me just also say, we're going to talk about, and we often use specific legumes and grasses as our fall winter cover crops: bell beans, vetches, peas, oats, barley, rye, and all that. But any crop, a well-established vegetable or flower crop, and dare I say weeds? Yeah, I'm going to say it. As long as they're established by the advent of the rains and they cover the soil, they fit the definition of a protected cover crop. And weeds are good. Yikes. Sort of. Ever notice how sort of at the end of a sentence really changes its meaning? Like, I love you so much. Sort of. Okay, I'll stop. Weeds are great in that they are very aggressive plants, really extensive roots, sometimes deep rooted. They go down and mine nutrients and take them up into the top portions of the plant, and then can either be put in compost or turned into the soil. Weeds are good if they don't go to seed. I come from New England. I was driven out of New England in the late 60s by a lot of dour expressions. It was at the time I would say, oh man, you're harshing my mellow. So I left for California. But an old ag expression from New England is 1 year of seeding, 7 years of weeding. And dour as it is, it's true. Do not let weeds go to seed. In the realm of cover crops, I'll talk a little bit about, and I would recommend using mustard in some situations. Do not let mustard go to seed in an annual vegetable garden or field. It'll cause you to weep and moan and gnash teeth. So get it, knock it down before it sets seed. Now there's a difference between flowering, seed set, and mature seed. Get it before the seeds mature. So cover crop protects the soil. And green manure is simply when you take that cover crop and you knock it down, again, on a field or a hand scale. On the garden scale, I just use a really sharp machete. I do what I call drop and chop. I drop it I cut it at the base, drop it down, chop it up. The more you chop up and reduce the particle size of your cover crop vegetation, the greater the surface area, the more the microbes can get on it, the quicker and more thorough the breakdown. So a green manure is simply a cover crop grown to be knocked down, chopped up, and turned into the soil. A catch crop, sometimes I use the term catch or trap crop. A catch crop is, mustard would be a good example. A crop that's grown to scavenge for nutrients. Mustard is particularly good at collecting in its foliage nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. Buckwheat is excellent at cycling phosphorus. So a catch crop just catches those nutrients before they leach downward in the profile. And they could be legumes or non-legumes. Fallow and bare soil. This is an old term, and a lot of times people would leave the ground fallow or bare for a season or even a year. And this is no longer considered to be a good thing. Let me make a value judgment here. Bare soil is bad. It's anathema. Anathema is a Greek word for meaning an accursed thing. It's anathema to good soil stewardship. If you look around in nature, in natural systems, you do not see bare soil a lot. And a lot of times in farming, sustainable farming, we're trying to mimic natural systems. So we want cover, not bare, fallow. Okay. Oh, actually, it doesn't matter where we go. Let's go back to green manure. And I can talk about green manure while we look at Jim Leap. Go back. Okay. So there's two routes you can go with your green manure. If you take the crop down, as I suggested with Sudan grass, and when it's still succulent and green and immature, not full-sized, then it's going to have a very high nitrogen content, and it's going to be very succulent, and it's so much easier to chop up and turn into the soil, and it will rot down quicker, as quick as a week or even 5 days during the warm part of the year, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in the cold spring. But it'll rot down quick because it's a succulent material that's susceptible to being decomposed by microbes in a rapid fashion. So if you use your green manure in this stage, early and succulent, it acts more as a fertilizer, and a powerful one. For about 10 years at the farm, we ran the field row crop operation on just green manure. Now, we established the fertility in our fields with both compost and manure over time. And I think in the end, using a diversity of tools for whatever you're doing, compost and green manures to create organic matter in this situation, is a good thing. I'm gonna make a little political joke here, if I might. And that's about diversity, in this case, in fertility systems. Diversity is good. It's a lot like government, democracy, of course, being the preferred type. The broader the constituency base, the greater the end product. So green manure and compost, immature green manures as a fertilizer. If you let that green manure get a little more mature, it builds up its carbon content. Yeah, it's a little harder to chop down, chop up, and turn into the soil, but it acts more to build the organic matter of the soil. It also acts as a fertilizer, but an immature green manure acts more primarily as a fertilizer, secondarily builds organic matter. A more mature green manure acts as a bodybuilder, an organic matter builder, and secondarily as a fertilizer. So if you use the two in tandem, you're so much the better. So for about 10 years at the farm, Jim Leap had a notion. Can we just get by on only using green manure, not having to make or import compost? And the answer was, yeah. And I'm gonna follow with that, sort of. It worked, and it worked really well. But then after that time period, we started to notice that we weren't quite getting the head size we wanted on broccoli, and the carrots weren't quite as good. So now we've gone back to using both green manures and compost. So there are tons of benefits, of course, from cover crops. And the fact that they prevent erosion, crusting, and puddling, aggregate reduction is huge. Can we skip forward to the raindrop slide? Boom, a napalm bomb. This is stark. Why you don't want bare soil. This is what happens when either through overhead irrigation or rain hits a bare soil. It literally explodes the soil. It destroys the aggregates. And what happens is the clay separates out from the sand and the silt. The clay seals off the surface and crusts it. And then with continued either irrigation or rain, you get puddling, and then you start slip sliding away, and you're definitely not getting closer to your destination, as Paul Simon once intoned, and you've got erosion. So the cushioning effect of foliage and the holding power of the roots is critical. Okay, we can go back to the benefits slide now. So we talked about, this is a green manure. Turning compost into the soil is an excellent way to increase organic matter. Organic matter, it's almost no matter what your issue is with the soil, it's almost like a panacea. You add organic matter. You've got a terrible, loose, droughty, sievey, sandy soil. Add organic matter. It builds and binds and helps you to retain both nutrients and water. You've got a wicked, sticky, adobe clay. Add organic matter. It lightens it and opens it up, increases pore space. And it is basically the glue that holds your aggregates together. It's a super glue like Organic matter is also a sponge for water. It's a downright drought buster. Some of the statistics on how much more water a soil holds with a higher organic matter content than not are phenomenal. Cover crops, as I was saying, as I'll say a little later when we talk about individual species, cover crops per se don't add nutrients to the soil, they just cycle them. If there's phosphorus there, buckwheat can bring it up, mustard can bring it up. If there's nitrogen there, grasses can bring it up, put it in their plant parts, then you turn it into the soil and you're just cycling nutrients. Now legumes, as we'll get to in a little while, are different. They can actually add nitrogen to the soil through an association with soil bacteria. We can move on here. The root action of cover crops is phenomenal as well. As I said, it binds and holds soil, keeps it from eroding. But they all the action of roots, their push-pull through the soil, both pushes soil contact, creates particle contact with your soils, and that starts the process of aggregation. And they also can go through and bust up tight soils like that. So this is a slide. Let me just say that Delise Weir, president of the Friends of the Farm and Garden, and Christophe Bernau, colleague and friend, manager of the UCSC Farm Garden, contributed to these slides. So this is a slice of the farm garden soil that Christophe dug out at the end of the cover cropping season, probably in March or April like that. And it's, as he labeled, the impacts of rainfall. So if you look on most of the slide from the left to all the way over towards the right, it's well aggregated, the surface is open and permeable. It's all good. And let me just say, as a shout out to both Christophe and Kelly, who are now managing the farm garden, and to previous managers, that was a wicked city sandy soil. That was not a soil that was suited for growing stuff. Same thing in the farm field. That they've created a soil through practices, the use of compost, cover crops, and good cultivation practices, that is this dark and granular is phenomenal. But on the right here, the right 2 inches or so, you see that was a portion of the bed that wasn't towards the edge in the path that wasn't covered with cover crop. So the soil pounded it. And you can see on the surface, it's got like a sheet-like platy structure. Platy structure is indicative of compaction. You've got, even in just one short season, some surface compaction starting. And if you follow that down vertically, it isn't as well aggregated. So what's the object lesson here? Cover up by one means or another. Let's move on. So identifying some goals, then we'll identify species. The determining the optimum planting window for fall, winter cover crops, September through November. Let me just tell you what I've been doing the last 7 or 8 years in the garden at Chadwick, which is in September, October into November, I just sow mustard, yellow mustard, white mustard, black mustard, they're all good. And I establish that cover crop. I broadcast sow it, and I just rake it into the soil, and I put a mulch over it, usually either leaves or straw. Straw, not hay. Hay has seeds, and you'll have a weed problem. And then I either irrigate or wait for the rains to bring it up. It only takes about 60, maybe 90 days for mustard to go through its cycle. So sometime in January or February, before it flowers and seeds, I come, again, this is on a garden scale, I come with a sharp machete and I drop and chop. I drop it, I cut at the base, I drop it down on the soil, I chop it up into small pieces. Again, smaller particle size equals more surface area, more ability for microbes to get on and decompose it. And I just then mulch right over it with some more straw, and then I sow a second, and it'll be like 2 or 3 inches thick, and I'll sow a second cover crop into that. Again, this is in January or February as a dry window allows. And the second cover crop is, as I mentioned, our standard mix BVOP, bell beans, vetch, oats, and peas. And together, between their biomass and their root action and the nutrients they sequester, they're phenomenal. So that's the timing. And then during the growing season, spring to fall, periodically we will sow a quick round of buckwheat. Buckwheat is a mighty mite. It only gets about 2-3 feet tall, goes through from seed to maturation in 30-40 days. And it is amazing in its physical effects on the soil in a positive vein. And it, as I said, cycles phosphorus. Let's talk about the quote unquote optimal time for clearing or incorporating your cover crops. It's generally considered to be before flowering or slightly into flowering. Again, the route I mentioned, number one, before flowering, more succulent, more as a fertilizer. And when you're maybe a quarter or a half in bloom with your legumes, I got a little more carbon buildup, but somewhere in that range there. If you're working on a garden scale, earlier is better because it's just simply easier physically to knock it down and chop it up when it's more succulent like that. Let's go to the next slide here. So goals, purposes, and all that jazz. But let me also say that that shot on the right, that's the BVOP I was talking about that. And isn't that an installation art piece? Wow, look at it. And you got all different size things there. Cool. Okay, so some of your goals. If you want to fix nitrogen, you use legumes. Again, legumes, grasses, and mustard are real good at grabbing the nitrogen that's already in your soil, but they don't add it. So legumes have this fantastic capability through a symbiotic process. Well, it's a process that used to be called symbiosis, but now they've renamed it as facultative parasitic. Sounds kind of gory. I like the more poetic symbiotic process. That is a relationship featuring the roots of legumes, bell beans, fava beans, clovers, alfalfa, etc., and a genus of soil bacteria, genus Rhizobium, and there are many species in that genus. So to kind of explain it in a way, this nitrogen fixation process, it's not too dry, technical, and boring. I have a little tale or fable. A former student worker of mine, Julia Toro, painted on the side of the chalet at the garden one afternoon when I was out advising at another orchard. She was a plant science major and also enamored of poetry too. She's now completed a master's in forestry at Berkeley and is embarking on a PhD program focusing on the strategies that the California Native peoples had for managing their forests, with the hope that we can adopt and adapt some of their native strategies. A good undertaking, no doubt. So Julia writes, again, a little tale. How the legume root got its nodule, a love story. 1, as the plant grows and requires nitrogen, it releases flavonoid metabolites. These are the things that give flavor and color to fruits and vegetables. It releases flavonoid metabolites into the soil, stimulating the growth of special root hairs. Soil rhizobia detect the plant's call, these flavonoids, and move to it. The rhizobia release signaling molecules called nod factors, stimulating growth of more special roots. Now the rhizobia bacteria create what's called an infection thread through the roots and move into the cortex of the root. Happily inside the cortex, the bacteria rapidly divide, and as you may know from problems in the kitchen with bacteria on the cutting board, bacteria can double their populations every 20 minutes. So it's an exponential increase. Happily inside the cortex, the bacteria rapidly divide, forming a swollen nodule protruding from the root, and then she puts 3 exclamation points. Within these magical, italices around it, within these magical nodules, the bacteria fix nitrogen from the soil air, transforming it into a form plants can use. The plant takes up this nitrogen and provides the bacteria with sugars, and they lived happily ever after. A little tale. So, but we, with cover crops, we step in and knock down the plant after it has fixed nitrogen, but before it uses it itself. And then that nitrogen that's in the nodules spews out into the soil and is there available to our follow or successive spring and vegetable crops. Spring and summer vegetable crops. Okay, let's move on a little bit. This is beautiful. What do they call it? Humble brag. This is from a book I wrote. It's called Fruit Trees for Every Garden by 10 Speed Press. You might want to check it out. This is a bell bean with roots and nodules. And note, you can kind of see it has a dual root system, a tap root that can go down 2 or 3 feet and break up. It's called a biodrill, break up or double dig your soil or chisel plow your soil. And then a nice fibrous surface root system that work and pulverize in a good way the soil. And you see the root nodules, the result of that love story, the relationship between the roots and the bacteria in the soil. So some of those other photos had pictures of nodules, but they were white. You see that these are pink. Pink is, so you can have 2 things with nodulation in legume roots: presence and effectiveness. White means they're present, they're there. Pink means they're effectively fixing nitrogen. The take home here, good. Okay, next slide. So the classic use over time, and I mean that time immemorial, going back 3,000-4,000 years, and presently in the farming community, is an admixture of legumes and grasses, cereals, annual grasses, oats, rye, barley, and a new kind of super hybrid called triticale, Triticale. And it came out in the 70s, and it was going to revolutionize the world, the bread bacon world. It's a hybrid between rye and wheat. And when's the last time you had a loaf of bread that was baked with triticale? It didn't catch on. But it's an excellent cover crop. It is one tough plant, and it really smothers the weeds. And cover crops in general, one of their positive effects is that they suppress weeds. Now, let me just say, a winter-grown cover crop will not suppress the summer amaranth weed. They suppress weeds that grow in that season simply by occupying space, taking up niches, all the resources above and below the ground like that. Well, we had a problem for a while in the farm field with mustard. It went to seed and was causing all kinds of havoc in our summer veg crops. So for a couple of years, and this is a shot, I believe, we just used triticale, this grass that's smothered and suffocated and suppressed mustard, and did a good job of it. Grasses, as I said, sequester, hold nitrogen, that then when you turn it into the crop into the soil, it's there for your follow crops. Nitrogen is the most expensive nutrient. It's the nutrient that's needed in the biggest amounts by plants, and it's the nutrient that is very easily leach and dangerously so into water table. So anything you can do to keep it up and available to your crops is good. Grasses do a very good job with this. Their roots are phenomenal. They're almost all in the surface foot, maybe, not so deep like legumes or mustard. And they just work the soil better than you could with any tool, hand, fork, or a rotavator, or anything you be pulled behind a tractor like that. They create good aggregation and really good structure. Again, they are a potential food crop, but just like fava beans, you cannot grow them through to fruition and get them to give you nutrients. They take nutrients there. Fodder for livestock's beyond the scope of today's presentation. And yeah, they are biomass accumulators. And they really add to the between their root action and their shoot action, add to the soil carbon. Let me just say this about grasses in praise of cereals and grasses. Some of the richest soils in the world were formed under perennial grasses. And again, the action of the roots, the sloughing off of the roots and the adding of organic matter, plus the tops as they die down, created well, I give you the Great Plains, the steppes of Russia, the pampas of Argentina. These are some of the most fertile breadbasket soils in the world, and were formed over millennia under grasses. The soils of the upper Midwest, which is the breadbasket of our soils in this country, are in a class of soils called mollisols. Sol is Latin for soil. Molla means to soften or to mollify. Like, if Claire is angry with me, I want to mollify her anger. But she never did. She's so patient, she hardly ever gets angry with me. So the mollisols are fabulous, and they're formed under grasses. Okay, as I mentioned, Sudan grass, which is actually black sorghum, is a good summer cover. Oats, barley, wheat, rye, etc., are more of a good fall into spring, early summer grass. Okay, let's move on. Brassicas as cover crops. Again, mustards are amazing. They give you quick cover, they give you biomass, they concentrate and sequester nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. Then it's liberated when it rots down as a green manure. They have a taproot that can go down considerably, and they actually, if you let them go to maturation, form an almost daikon-like root, like that. And speaking of daikons are great, certainly in the kitchen, but in the soil, and there are now forage daikons, forest radishes that have been developed that are big old coarse things that go down and foot and a half, occupy space in the soil. And then as they die, the carbon just melts into the soil and they leave nice openings in the soil. Can be good bee forage plants. Yeah, bees love brassicas. But let me just say, if you're growing cover crops, the window for attracting bees or other beneficial insects to cover crops is kind of feast or famine. Very narrow window, and then you have to turn them in. But the brassicas are very good at attracting all manner of bees, native and non-native, and some parasitic wasps that can help you with insect control. Yep, many species are edible. Grow them over there in the vegetable plot. Okay, next. Buckwheat, as I mentioned, it just doesn't compute. A few years ago, we had a plot in the field at the farm where we were growing a late summer buckwheat crop preceding a fall CSA vegetable block. And so the buckwheat grew, and it was beautiful, and it was turned into the soil, and the soil was worked up and bedded up. And then we have a system we use, it's called a stale bed. And you can do this at home in your garden. You can do it on a field scale, which is that you incorporate your cover crop, you work the soil, you bed up, and then you water or irrigate. When you turn the soil and add light to it and oxygen, it stimulates the weed seed bank, which, talk about a rich account. The weed seed bank is seemingly endless. So you get a flush of weeds. So you can play on that by working your beds up, watering, usually in about 10 to 14 days, you'll have an emergence of weeds. And then when they're really small, sometimes we call this at the thread stage. If you knock them down, you see just a little white thread and then a little bit of green, and almost just like sprouts. And you knock them down at that point, and then you seed or plant, and you're getting a jump start on the weeds like that. But anyhow, this plot of buckwheat was put in, and it was plowed in, and it was a period of time where it was just plowed, but we didn't bed up. And people would walk by, both knowledgeable people and just casual passerby. And to a person, they would stop, look at the soil. Some even would grab a handful and they would marvel at its tilth, its structure, and its aggregation. And that's what buckwheat does to the surface soils. It's just phenomenal. Daryl Wong, along with Kirsten Yog, are two farm managers now at the farm, and I might say the two most thoughtful farmers I've ever met, who work beautifully in tandem. He did an experiment last year where he took a plot of summer buckwheat and he irrigated one, and he didn't even irrigate to get the seed germinated in the other half of the plot. And yeah, the irrigated plot was irrigated maybe every 5-7 days, grew a little more robustly than the non-irrigated plot, but not that much, certainly not enough to justify the use of water. And that's kind of the way it is with buckwheat. It'll grow anywhere, true story. I was once putting in some buckwheat time to knock it down and turn it and chop it up and turn it into soil. It gets very stringy and difficult to deal with after that. Okay, next. This is the end of the process. There are two routes, again, for you gardeners out there. Green manure, chopping and turning it into soil can be a little arduous, although I'm in love with it. So one of the ways we work in the garden sometimes is we take a cover crop and look at that cover crop. That was a wet year. That was a good year. You've got 6 foot tall cover crop. And some years when the rain is shy, the cover crop is shy. We get 2 foot cover crop like that. But so in the garden, these are garden beds, the farm garden. We come and we use a sharp spade and we skim the green material off at the surface level. We take it over to our compost area and we make compost with it. And if we just did that, we would be extracting nutrients. So we then take a previously made compost and put it on this bed for this growing season. I like that. One important thing, if you're skimming your cover crops off to make compost with the legumes, take great effort to leave the roots in. When you leave the roots of the legumes in the soil, as I said, and you kill the tops, the nodules just spew out into the soil and then are there for your broccoli, your cauliflower, your cabbage, your agrostem, or your zinnias, whatever. That's the end of the cycle. The beginning of the cycle for establishing, whether it's garden scale or field scale. I'm going to talk garden scale a little bit here right now. You just skim off the previous crop. I say skim with a sharp spade, cut it at the base. You can leave a little stubble. It can be rough. That's fine. And skim, because if you leave the roots in, they'll rot down and add organic matter to the soil. And then we just scatter, so broadcast our cover crop seeds into our permanent beds. You can stand on one side and do half and walk around to the other, or have a partner on the other side and do the other. It's pretty quick and easy. And you see, this is Anna, who used to be a second year at the farm, and I'm happy to see her again. She's using a rake, a bow rake. We just then rake that seed in with really sharp, quick strokes, moving in one direction away from you. And it covers about 80–90% of the seed. Then we put a light mulch of either leaves or straw, irrigate or wait for the rains like that. It's quite easy. Having a little stubble is fine. It's not like it's not like you're sowing carrots. Okay, establishment. The care of cover crops is really minimal. If it doesn't rain for an extended period, you might have to irrigate them a little. But generally, you put them in, the fall rains bring them up if you don't irrigate them up, and the rains take care of growth. The more it rains, the more lush your cover crop's going to be. The happier you will be, and it doesn't matter if you're a farmer or a gardener, the happier you will be until you try to turn it in. It's a little rough to turn in a really big cover crop. Okay, next. This is our field operation, and we have a beautiful tool called a flail mower, all these little sharp blades that just like that, and take that 6 foot cover crop and put it on the ground, as you see that green material on the left portion of this slide. It does not compute. I go out into the field, there's a 6 foot cover crop, they make a couple passes with this flail mower and it looks like that. But hey, the crop don't lie. It's phenomenal, reducing particle size. And then we move over it with what you see, that tractor there is pulling a thing we call a mechanical spader. We could maybe move on. So we mow and then we spade. And next slide. We can go on a little more. And again, the value of seeing these slides that have our, well, we're not quite getting to thoughts back. We're almost there, folks. The value of the couple 3 slides we have that have our retired living happily in the Prunedale area and working for the USDA over in organic research over in Monterey. Jim Leap is, yeah, we're looking at the tool here, but Jim Leap, he's quite a guy. You know, you may meet a better vegetable row cropper somewhere, but I can't imagine where or when. I think that's an old Ella Fitzgerald song. Kudos to James. But here he is giving you his look. And he's also sitting on top of, this is the mechanical spader I was referring to. Some of you may be aware of the system that was introduced at the Chadwick Garden and that we use to teach, which is called raised bed double digging. Well, this mechanical spader is the field version of double digging with a hand spade. It's a set of stainless steel blades that are 15, 18 inches long on a reciprocating piston, and they go up and down and they double dig the soil. This is a phenomenal tool. I have never seen a tool on a mechanized scale that is as gentle on the soil as the mechanical spader is. Okay, that's the good news. What's the bad news? They're kind of pricey, and you drive your tractor in what's called creeper gear, which is 1/2 mile an hour. So if you got 100 acres to plow, it ain't gonna work. But it works beautifully on small farms, maybe under 20, 40 acres. They have mixed 1, 2, 3 acre plots like that, its positive effects on the soil are phenomenal. I'm not going to talk much about no-till today. We should get Darryl Wong, our farm manager again, who's doing his PhD. That's his thesis. But I will say this in favor of tillage or cultivation, digging or plowing. If done right, in a skilled manner, at the right time, that is with the soil neither too wet nor too dry, it can have, there are 2 types of cultivation, primary and secondary. Primary cultivation or tillage is when you rough dig with a spade or you run a disc in a field. It just roughly works the soil and it's kind of clunky and coarse. And then secondary cultivation is with a garden fork where you literally pulverize it to get a fine surface, particulate surface bed for seeds or seedlings. The same thing in the field with either a rotavator or a harrow. The former, primary cultivation, actually begins, if done well, not too much, at the right moisture, actually begins the process of forming soil aggregates. The gentle contacts from pushing soil together, how should I fast 5 times? Pushing soil together starts to cement the soil, clunky word, into aggregates. It is the effects and repeated effects of secondary tillage, where you're pulverizing the soil to get a nice fine surface, that is the more destructive aspect of tillage or cultivation. So, and then whether you're working garden or field scale, you need to learn tillage or cultivation. You need to become skilled at it. Let me use an analogy. Some of you may have heard, I play the guitar. Some of you may have heard of Eric Clapton or B.B. King or Chrissie Hynde. They play the guitar. They're way more skilled than I am. So become a skilled cultivator. That's all I got for you now. We can take questions, and I thank you for your patience, folks. Did you, oh, okay. Yes, questions, thoughts, experiences, bring it.
Okay, we got lots of questions, so
okay.
we're not worried about that. And we can share, these are some resources, but maybe we'll follow up with those on via email. But at a glance, I don't know if you want to speak to these resources that are up on your screen, Orin.
Sure, I could. Anything ATRA puts out, it's really depressing because it's so good. I wonder, why do we even try? And they put out a lot of stuff. Managing cover crops profitably, is this available free online, Claire?
The PDF is free, or you can order, you can pay for a print copy, but PDF totally free. Really
great book. Cast's videos, A Cast of Thousands. Yeah, those guys are pretty good. Those people are pretty good. Sources for seeds in the area here. General Feed and Seed out on Commercial Way, right across from what used to be called Carhartt. I think it's USA Rental by Dominican Hospital, offers a whole range of cover crop seeds, 5 or 6 different types of clovers, bell beans, fava beans, vetches, grasses, you name it, buckwheat, sorghum. They offer it in 50-pound bags, and they sell it out of bins. You can get, as little as you like, really good. And in Mountain Feed and Seed up in San Lorenzo Valley is I don't like to go to, or when I go to that place, I only take a limited amount of cash. They have so much good stuff that you want to buy everything they have, and they have just about everything. San Lorenzo Lumber, I believe they're calling themselves again, and Home Center, Garden Center, sells the main mix that I referred to: BVOP, bell beans, vetch, oats, and peas. And it's sold, its brand name is alternately Soil Builder Mix or Good Humus Mix, and it's good. They also sell some individual species of grass and clovers as well. I didn't really say much about clovers, and as much as I love clovers, I don't use them very much. And the reason is we live here in a Mediterranean climate, and so our soils were developed under Mediterranean conditions, and they have Mediterranean soil organisms. And the bacteria that you need to fix clovers, the bacteria that you need to fix nitrogen with vetches, bell beans, and favas is resident in our soils because those species of cover crops are native to the Mediterranean rim. This makes sense. And the clovers come from the calcareous soils of the Midwest, the upper Midwest, the mid-latitudes of Central Europe and such. And those soils have different bacteria. We don't have those bacteria in our soil so much. So there are several other reasons I don't grow clovers that much, although I love them. So the net result is that even a well-grown clover, whether it's annual or perennial, doesn't fix as much nitrogen in our area as bell beans, favas, and vetch does. The other thing about clovers, they're small seeded and really slow to establish, and really they find weed pressure difficult. The other thing about clovers is they are truffles, filet mignon for gophers. They love them. And of all the different clover-like things, it's not actually a clover. I'm going to say a thing about alfalfa. Alfalfa is king. Doesn't grow well here. It's not warm enough, and it likes a really high soil pH in excess of 7.0. Our pHs natively are less than 6 here, somewhat acidic. Where alfalfa grows really well is the upper end of the Salinas Valley, salina, meaning salt. Salty soils are high in pH. pH is good. Wicked hot there. You ever go through Paso Robles in the summer when it wasn't at least 104? But alfalfa, there's records of its taproot, a biodrill, going down 30, 40 feet and actually fracturing granite bedrock. That's a biodrill. But I don't use them much. You can also buy really amazing single species and mixes from both territorial seeds and Johnny's, and these are really great to fool around with. But I wouldn't buy anything that weighed more than about 5 pounds, particularly from Johnny's, because you pay the shipments from back east. But check out some of their mixes; they're phenomenal. Okay.
All right, and we're gonna stop sharing screen. Great. And so let's see. One question is about California natives. Are there California native cover crops? As a recommendation, would yarrow as a cover crop for fruit trees?
Yeah, I love yarrow. It's a perennial. So you got to think about your system. Are you an annual system or a perennial system? Let me sing the praises of yarrow. It is one tough plant. It can grow in almost no fertility and no water. Has a fibrous root system, very shallow, maybe not more than 4 or 5 inches. It works the soil. It is an exquisite flower, whether it's just a look at. It has a cut flower. There are some beautiful domesticated yarrows, for one called terracotta, that's just a knockout, as a fresher dried flower. It is a really great insectary plant. The domed flower head is good for all manner of bees, again, native and non-native. Parasitic wasps, these are not stinging wasps, but really small wasps that predate on detrimental insects. So it's good in that regard. I just question how it could be used in it, because it would take the better part of a year to establish it, and then you'd have to turn it in. But one California native that's dynamite is Phacelia, Phacelia. It's got an amazing taproot and a fibrous root system, gives you loads of biomass. And then when it blooms, it's actually a pretty darn good cut flower, and is another insectary plant. It fits, it's an annual, so it can be sown in the fall, early winter, grows through the winter, and then it's turned in the spring. So that's what I have on a native candidate.
And somewhat related, when you're talking about system, we had a lot of questions on cover crops in orchards
Oh.
and fruit trees,
Great.
and particularly
You folks,
perennial
you
cover
guys
crops.
got plenty of time between now and midnight. Let's talk orchards. Let me take that, say in tree systems, in orchards, and perennial systems. We do, as I said, with our annual flower and vegetable beds regarding cover crops. Here's what I do with fruit trees. Think about this. An apple, a pear could live 75, 100 years. A plum, maybe 50 or 75 years. You've only got one chance to improve the soil before you plant. So you best do it and do it well. So the season before I plant, I will do some sort of deep tillage. On a tractor scale, that's a chisel plow. On a garden scale, I'll at least single dig it, again, depending on the condition of my soil. I will apply a good amount of compost as well. And then I'll seed a cover crop, maybe buckwheat or Sudan grass in the summer. I'll grow that and I'll turn that in. Come around to the fall, I'll sow our BVOP, a bell beans, vetch, oat, pea mix. I'll grow that. And then come around to January, bare root tree planting time. And I'm planning on doing a talk, I hope with videos, 2 talks on fruit trees in January. Stay tuned. All we do, like in a field, we just snap a line and pace out every 10 feet where we want to have the tree. We just skim about a 3-foot circle where the cover crop is, put it aside, dig our hole, plant it, put the cover crop back on as a mulch, then put wood chips on it. Then come in the spring, we'll knock down the rest of the cover crop and either turn it in and turn it into the soil. This works, what I'm about to say works on a garden scale most excellently and works pretty good on a field scale if you're committed to it. And that is in year 1 and year 2, I add a little compost around the base of at planting year 1, and then in year 2, around the base of the tree, maybe a couple, 3 shovelfuls in a 2-3 foot circle, work it into the soil. And I'll put on anywhere from a ½ pound to a pound of organic fertilizer, and then I'll mulch with wood chips. I do this to jumpstart the tree. You're going to pay 30, 40 bucks for a tree and you want to protect your investment. And then once the tree gets up and growing, this is my sole recipe, as it were, for fertility in an established 3 years or older tree block. I'll put down about 3 to 5 inches of wood chips, and you can get wood chips from tree services. If you go out to 38th Avenue to Davy Trees Corporation Yard, and the guy's not too grumpy, early in the morning, he'll load you up. If you happen to have a 6-pack of Paps with you, you might be more favorably inclined. So you can, if you see tree crews in the area, just flag them down. They're often wanting to avoid the dump fees, and they'll give you some. So I plant the tree year 1, year 2, I fertilize and compost it, but I'm applying to the whole bed. I'm applying in spring and then again in fall, 3 to 5 inches, yep, of wood chips. I keep it away from the trunk. You don't want it up against the trunk. So I come in the fall, and in the trees, I just use bell beans, straight up, nothing else. I don't like grasses because they're so tenacious with the roots. In the hand system, it's hard to get them out and they resprout. And I mean, let me say, I love grasses, but I don't use them in this instance. And I don't like vetches in this instance because vetch is a vine and it recognizes the tree as a trellis and it climbs up and it creates all kinds of havoc in the spring. And one of the reasons for combining a grass in any mix that has a vetch is as the stalk of the grass starts to elongate vertically, it's a good climbing post for the vetch so it doesn't get all matted down on the ground like that. So I come and I put wood chips on spring and fall. In the fall, I just scatter sow, broadcast sow bell beans into the whole tree bed. Then I'll just rake it into the chips. It's quite easy. They're porous, or I'll put a little more chips over it. I'll walk away, go mushroom hunting. In the old days, maybe go to Baja, Hawaii, come back in the spring, write the great American novel, come back in the spring, And when it's about waist high, chest high, but still, again, succulent and green, easy to deal with, I come with a sharp machete and I knock it down. I drop it and I chop it up a little bit on the surface. And right then I mulch over it with another 3 to 5 inches of wood chips. And it's the cumulative effect after a few years when you get going with this system is phenomenal. One, the chips are a really good suppressor of weeds, annual weeds, not perennial weeds. And the positive effects, the wood chips break down much quicker than you would think, and they give rise to these white mycelial strands, fungal hyphae that are just great. And you can just, the improvement in the quality of the soil is palpable. So that's what I do with trees. What's next?
Could you talk a little bit about seed predation and measures against voles, gophers, mice, birds? I don't know if you know about any of those predators.
I'm intimately familiar with all those predators. Okay, let's break this down. Stick to cover crops here. Gophers are a problem. Like I said, especially with clovers. They're not particularly fond of the BVOP mix, the bell, beans, veg, oats, and peas. I like the peas a little bit. That's not to say they're not going to take it down. The best way to deal with gophers is to trap them, to be very systematic about it. Kind of the best, what's the trap we use, Claire?
It's a cinch trap
Trap.
through Gophers Limited.
And it's really great. If you want to hire someone to help you with your gopher problems, Thomas Whitman, who used to work with us, has Gophers Limited, and he's good. He'll teach you how to catch them or catch them for you. So gophers. Voles. Right now, we at the Chadwick Garden are experiencing a vole population explosion. Voles, they're kind of like mice, except they're both diurnal and nocturnal, and it's like they're members of the US Olympic sprint team. They jet about, and they love vegetation. Not so much seeds, but vegetation. About 10 years, and their populations are boom or bust. There'll be none for an extended period of time, and then boom. We're in a boom phase right now. About 10 years ago, we had a problem, and it made it difficult for us to grow leaf crops. Then one winter, two things happened. One is a couple of beautiful red-shouldered hawks took up residence in the redwoods adjacent to the garden, and they were scarfing voles 4 or 5 a day at least, like that. And they actually knocked down the population very considerably. But the other thing I read about a researcher up in Washington State, because voles are a problem in orchards and vineyards, and they use conventional rodenticides, and there's much secondary poisoning of raptors and owls, and it's terrible. And this guy came up with a simple thing. You use 3 parts rolled oats and 1 part plaster of Paris, not wet, the dust. You mix it up and you put it out in something. I just use a little 4-inch pot and put it on the side and put it in. And what it does is they come and they eat it. Let me just say, we're teaching evolution in voles. Lately, what they've done is they eat the oats and they leave the plaster. But what it is you want them to get the plaster because it constipates them to death. And should an owl eat the carcass, it recognizes it as bone and regurgitates it. So it's really non-toxic to other species. The thing of it is you have to be very consistent and do it over a prolonged period of time. Anytime you see their runs are just these ridiculous little 2-foot surface tunnels like that. They don't go down like gopher. If you see it, bust it up like that. Birds can be a problem. My wife is a birder, and the birding community is excited because recently in the last month or so, the sparrows have come back to the coast here. Us gardeners, farmers, not so excited. And a good birder can tell the difference. You got white-crowned sparrows, one of the species that are here. They're here and a lot of them go to Alaska for the summer. Good riddance. And then they come back in the fall. And a real good birder can say, oh, that's a sparrow species or strain that's from the Sitkas. So that's from this. They know by their patterning and their song what area of Alaska they're from. Okay, birds are a problem. They're especially sparrows, but also juncos, primary. Most of the birds that are in your garden, around your garden, are probably either neutral or positive. That is, they're insectivorous. They eat insects. It's good. With birds, you may have to resort to either remay, row cover, till you get the crop up. Or you can take PVC or electrical conduit and make little hoops and get bird netting and cinch it to the piping and keep them out. Usually with the cover crops, if you can get them established, maybe 3 or 4 inches high, they grow faster than their predator. Okay.
Could you speak a little bit to seeding rates per acre?
Yeah, I could. It depends. Clovers is little, very small seed, as little as 5-6 pounds to the acre. An acre is 4V, 3,560 square feet. So you can do the math to determine how big your bed or plot is. Mustards are more about 10 to 20 pounds to the acre. And bell beans or fava beans, or the BVOP mix I keep praising here. I started out in the 70s, it was recommended to do it at 50 pounds to the acre. Now they say 150 to 200 pounds to the acre, and then they put a semicolon after that and say, if you can afford it. It's pretty pricey like that. The idea of oversowing and more competition is certainly not a good thing with carrots or lettuce or radishes, but it's a really good thing with cover crops. Very quickly covers the soil, especially if you have a grass in a mix. Grasses are considered nurse crops. That is, they come up quickly in 3 to 5 days, quickly shield and protect the soil, and the legumes take longer, 7 to 10 days to come up. So a thick stand, that 150 to 200 pounds per acre, will get you quicker establishment, more establishment, etc. And it's going to be more pricey too. There's another thing about competition. The more competition, I mean, you can take anything to too much of an extreme. So there can be too much of a good thing, except chocolate and ice cream, perhaps. But the competition among species with dense sowing makes the legumes, quote unquote, work harder and fix more nitrogen. That's a good thing. On the garden scale, you don't need that much seed. If you have as few as 10 to 15 seeds per square foot, that's probably going to be adequate. I tend to sow a little more because of predation issues, as mentioned, particularly birds like that. Better be safe than sorry like that. But if you had, let's say, 4 plants per foot on a garden scale versus 15 or 20 per foot, the result is about the same. That is, you'll get about the same root action or root effect, nitrogen fixation perhaps, and biomass. So there.
Thinking about small spaces, is it possible to have both a winter garden and also incorporate cover crop into that?
Yeah, it is. You just have to divvy up your soil. How big's your plot? So there's 3 ways you can go with that. You can just say, this winter I'm cover cropping. I'm going to skip the veggies, go to farmer's market. The other is you can divide it in half or quarters. If you divided your plot in quarters, season 1, you can sow cover crops in it and have veggies in the other, or flowers, don't forget flowers, in the other 3. Season 2, you move it around. Season 3, you move it around. So in 4 years, you get through like that. So, you know, it's possible to divvy up the land in that fashion, sure. You may not now cover crop. You may be hesitant to cover crop. Okay, I'm going to do this. I can't see you, but I got to trust you. Everybody raise your right hand. Come on. Okay, you can raise your left hand. I don't care. Okay, repeat after me. I do solemnly swear, and you can joyously swear. That's okay too. That going forward, I'll always grow cover crops. Okay, you are now deputized as soil stewards. I really encourage you to do it. Like I said, when you've grown a cover crop, you come out in the spring before you're going to knock it down, you thrust your hand into the soil. You'll notice I said, grab a handful of soil about 6 or 8 times through this talk. And I'm trying to train myself that every time I walk out into the garden, I grab a handful of soil. I look at it, I analyze it, and often marvel at it. But anyhow, you've grown your cover crop. You come out in the spring before you're going to knock it down and plow it in. And you grab a handful of soil. The palpable fecundity that is in that soil will, as it were, knock your socks off. The results you're going to see short term, that next spring, summer with your veg crops is phenomenal. Okay.
Yeah, maybe one more before we go. There were a couple questions about cover crops in orchards and access. Is there a way to be able to better access the trees for pruning in the winter?
Nah, it's a god awful mess. It is. Oops, lost my glasses. I haven't quite figured everything out yet, folks. Tread lightly. Actually, we, as I said, cover crops both in the garden and in our field orchard in the tree bed. And when we get in January, February, there is some trotting and treading and trampling. But you do try to be careful. It is actually amazing if you are a little careful and step lightly, how, yeah, you're gonna knock them down, dislodge them a little bit, they'll bounce back. And I will say this about, again, I'm gonna plug it one more time, BVOP, bell beans, vetch, oats, and peas. The vetch is the outlier. It's the slowest to germinate, the slowest to grow. And in the end, it might make the most biomass, but it makes like 2/3 of its growth in the last 1/3 of its growth cycle. So if there is any incidental damage during the pruning period, the vetch will still be small, working down there on the ground. And then when you knock down the grass a little bit or the bell beans a little bit, it creates an opening and an opportunity for the vetch to take off and grow. And boy, does it. Okay.
Okay, well, I think, okay, well, a good last question that I can answer is, I had to miss the first part. Will this be posted on YouTube, please? We will share out this recording with everyone here, and then I'm actually not sure if it'll be, usually these things get posted on YouTube, but you will have access to the recording no matter what. And so I know we didn't get to all the questions. I guess we got to go longer next time. Unfortunately, I have a really mean boss who doesn't let me work overtime, so I'm gonna move us forward, and maybe we can get the slides.
If you have questions, folks, you can email me. It's just orin@ucsc.edu. And if you put in bold caps on the subject cover crops, I will respond with more than electronic grunt, which is my usual fashion. But Claire, do we have the final Amamutsun slide?
Yep. So Anne's bringing that up now. And also is a real person.
Here at my kitchen table on December the whatever 9th, talking seed catalogs, ordering seeds.
Yeah, and if you're also interested in joining the Friends, check that out at caspis.ucsc.edu. And if we go to the next slide, usually we offer these sorts of workshops for a fee, but we're offering them for free. That being said, if you're able to contribute, please support the Amamutsun Land Trust, and direct your donations there. And Vanessa has just dropped that donor link in the chat, so you can follow that. Again, we're going to share all relevant resources, info, links, etc. with you in a document that will also share the recording of this event. So thank you.
I have one closing thing, if I might, which is a huge shout out to Claire. And she is an example of, as I said earlier, of David Robles, of the next generation. I consider my duty from here on to pass the torch to the young bloods. See you, folks.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your evening and happy cover cropping.